Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the next installment in travel watercolor palette swatching. Today I'm going to be swatching this Meeden watercolor palette and the contents of it. So this palette itself is just by the brand Meeden that I purchased off of Amazon. These are super cheap, like 10 bucks or something. And I just filled this palette with a variety of colors here that I'm going to swatch today. I won't go into these until we start swatching, but I did want to let you know that I have changed this palette around quite a bit. So this is what it was not too long ago, and then I have done some changes, which is why I had to change my little chart that I had already written up, but I'll show you that here in a minute. So this, I will put a link to this, which is the Chic Sparrow Narrow Traveler's Notebook that I keep all of my swatch books in for my travel watercolor palettes. I'm going to set that aside for now. You're probably not going to see that for the rest of the video. And I took this little swatch book out of that book, and this is where I'm going to be swatching. So as I was saying, because I have made some changes since I wrote up these little charts, I ended up having to use some correction tape and correcting some of these and actually taking away a couple of the pan slots because I put a couple of full pans instead of half pans. So correction tape works pretty well for that. It looks a little messy, but like I said, I mean, this is just my personal swatch book, so I'm not really concerned with the mistakes and the corrections. That's not really a problem to me. And you'll even see that when I was originally stamping the sheet that I dropped the stamp after I had stamped it once. And so you have sort of a little ghost print of the stamp here. All right. And both of these pages are both for this palette because this palette is pretty full. One of the nice things, I was going to say that I took this metal piece out of the palette, but I didn't, because one of the nice things about this particular palette is that it has, so all the metal palettes have these little guys. Let's see if I can get that out without causing too much trouble there with the colors. And these are always removable, albeit sometimes a little difficult to remove. Let's see. Sometimes they're a little lodged in there because they get stuck on the lip there. Okay, there we go. So these sorry for the struggle there. So these little inserts come out of pretty much all of these metal palettes. So sometimes if I want to put more than 2 rows in one of these palettes, I'll take this little metal palette out, and then I will just put magnetic stickers on the back of the pans, and then they will stick to this surface back here because it should be magnetic. But the nice thing about this Meeden pan is that this little insert here allows you to fit, the sizing is such that it allows you to fit another row here in the middle. So it's kind of nice just to have that added security of that little metal tray in there. Okay, well, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and get swatching. As usual, I have put a little triad mixing chart here that we'll do at the end. I will go over the colors that I'm using for that and the reasons why I picked them once we're done with the swatching, because I don't want this to take too incredibly long since this is a larger palette that I'm swatching today. Okay, so I am going to zoom in as per usual so that you can see the swatching a little bit better. I think for this one I'm probably gonna, because the swatch rows don't go too far over, I'll put them here so that you can see most of the colors while I'm swatching them. So let's see. Okay, and this one's a little dirty, so I'll try to get it on the side that's not dirty. I should start by saying most of the colors in here are Rembrandt brand. And I'm just now realizing that that's probably going to be a problem for me swatching, so I'll move that over just a little bit. So this first one is Rembrandt Cadmium Yellow. And I know I've talked about this before, but the cadmiums tend to be fairly opaque, and they don't dilute as well for these later little diluted squares. Rembrandt is actually one of my favorite watercolor brands for really vibrant colors. This one is Cadmium Yellow Deep. And these are both true cadmiums. They are not hues. I know a lot of brands are moving away from doing the cadmium colors for a variety of reasons. Oh, and I forgot to mention at the top of the video that I will put a link down below to the prior swatching videos that I have done so that you can sort of see what the convention is for this and you know, get a better sense of all of the different things that I'm using here. Okay, so the next one is, oh, so since I did also, oh, and I didn't change the colors of the reds. Okay, well, let me do that. Let's see. So, oh no, so I still have them. So I have to make sure, so these are not in order anymore as to what's in the palette. So I have to make sure that I'm paying attention. It's always hard when I'm talking to you and doing this. So I'm gonna actually move this over to the side here so that I can pay attention to that a little bit better, but you'll still be able to see. I'll show you the palette again at the end compared to the samples. So this one is Rembrandt Cadmium Red Medium. So that is actually on the next row down here now. Yeah, after I made some changes, I had to move things around a little bit in the palette to get them all to fit properly. And then this next one is Rembrandt Permanent Matter Lake, which is also a red. And that is also in the second row here, which you can't see because I'm painting. And this is really a nice sort of peachy red. You can get some really nice, almost pinks when you dilute it. Okay, so now we're going back up to the top row. Daniel Smith Venetian Red. And there's a lot of opaque colors in here. I'm just realizing that's not necessarily a bad thing. I've talked about before about how opaque colors sometimes take over a mix if you are mixing with other colors, but you can also correct for that by using a weaker mix of the color. You can use more water, or you can use less of that color of the opaque color than the transparent color that you're mixing with. Okay, so let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to get the lay of the land here to make sure that I am still doing the appropriate colors. Because I have another red here in my palette. Oh no, okay, so that's down here. So here we're going to go to Rembrandt Ultramarine Deep. And that's actually down on my third row. So confusing, I'm confusing myself. It's one problem when you make changes. And I am one of those people that makes changes to things all the time. I kind of don't necessarily like to have, especially with watercolor palettes, I don't necessarily like to have it be the same all the time. So I will make a ton of changes because I'm like, oh, I really like that color, I like that color, and I'd prefer to have that color. And then I have to kind of figure out things like this. If I'm trying to keep track of my watercolor palettes, I have to kind of keep track of where they are. Okay, so this next color, so HM is my abbreviation here for a handmade watercolor. So this next one is called Purple Heart Trescondia, and it is by a maker called Poppy Jasper that I found off of Etsy. And this is a really beautiful purpley, maybe deep purple. I was gonna say it's a purpley something. I didn't really know what to call it, but it's really beautiful. And I didn't, so I have, let me back up. So I have a separate palette with a whole bunch of handmade watercolors in it. And I don't have this particular one in there and a couple others that I have in here, because in that palette I am keeping my handmade watercolors that have a lot more granulation. And this one it's very smoothly mixed, and so are the other handmade colors that I have. So I kind of wanted to keep this, not necessarily not granulating, but I did want to keep it to sort of evenly toned colors. And you'll see I dropped a little bit of water in there, so we're getting a little bit of bloom. And that will also happen more on less expensive watercolor paper, which this is. I think this might be a Canson paper or one of the other cheaper brands. I can't remember, because this was an insert that I purchased as it was made. So the next color is Rembrandt Permanent Green. And Rembrandt colors are super bright. And as I was saying earlier, I actually really like them because they are so pigmented and they mix really well with a variety of other watercolor brands. So if you find a color that you really like in Rembrandt, you really don't have any concerns with putting it in a palette with other watercolor brands. I've never had any trouble. Okay, and then we have Rembrandt Yellow Ochre. I'm also not wetting these colors beforehand, and I didn't really need to because they re-wet so easily. The Rembrandts wet super easily. Maybe not as easily as, say, a Core watercolor, but they still wet really easily. Okay, so now we're getting back to that red that I skipped earlier, which is a Daniel Smith Permanent Alizarin Crimson. Alizarin Crimson, just as a single pigment color, is, I don't know if it's fugitive. Fugitive meaning it's really going to fade, but it is definitely not very light fast. So this, which is a permanent alizarin crimson, is a hue. It is a mix of different colors that make a hue that look like alizarin crimson. And alizarin crimson makes really nice mixes, which is why a lot of people like it. Even the fugitive version, they still make it because a lot of people use it. Okay, so now I'm going to move down to this next page here. And the next color that I have here is Rembrandt Sepia. So I'm going to see where I have that on my palette. And sepia is one of those colors that I don't use very often. You could probably use it in place of a burnt umber or some kind of darker brown. And every brand's sepia seems to be a little different. This one's a little more greenish, which I think looks quite nice, actually. It's also really nice for just tonal paintings. If you're doing a monochrome, for example, sepia is a good color to use for that. Okay, and then the next one I have here is a handmade sienna, and I don't remember the brand of watercolor that this is. So if I can find it, I will put it down below, and if not, just know that it's from one of the many handmade watercolor sellers on Etsy. I purchase a lot of handmade colors on Etsy. I like to support small artists for one thing, and then it's also kind of interesting to see what kind of different watercolor mixes people come up with when they make their own. I am planning to make my own watercolor at some point, but I just really haven't gotten there yet. Okay, so the next one is Holbein Ivory Black. Let me see where that one is. Yeah, and a couple of weekends ago, and maybe longer ago now by the time I post this video, I did sort of a clearing out of a lot of my palettes and tried to make them a little bit more harmonious, because I had several palettes where they were just kind of like dumping grounds for things that I didn't know what to do with. So I made them a little more curated, and things like this Holbein Ivory Black got moved into this palette because it seemed like it would fit better here than another palette that I had it in. Okay, so the next one is a handmade Prussian blue. So this is by the same maker that made the sienna here. And it came in a little 2 watercolor set. These 2, Prussian blue and the sienna, make a really nice range of mixes. And one thing to note, I can't remember if this is a true Prussian blue or if it's a hue, but Prussian blue is actually supposedly very poisonous. So you definitely don't want to be eating, well, you don't want to be eating any paint, but with Prussian blue, you do need to be particularly careful because it is one of those colors that would be toxic. So the next one here is Daniel Smith's Sodalite Genuine. And this came in a set. Oh, and apparently I also listed them upside down on this one. Man, this was really, I was really testing myself here, keeping myself on my toes. The Sodalite Genuine is almost like an indigo, and it's a really, really pretty color. It came in a set of pan blues that I got from Daniel Smith, and I've since broken them up and put them elsewhere. But this is one that I'm definitely thinking of getting a tube of once I've used this because it's really super pretty. You could also use it kind of like a Payne's Gray. So the next color is Daniel Smith's Cerulean. I think this one was also in that same pan blue set. And this is cerulean, not cerulean chromium. Daniel Smith also makes a cerulean chromium, which is a little bit brighter and more intense in color. This one is also really, really beautiful. Quite frankly, they could be used interchangeably, but if you wanted to get as much of a pigment load from this one, you'd probably have to use more paint. Okay, so the next one is Schminke Neutral Tint. Get a little more pigment there. And Schminke Neutral Tint is one of the neutral tints that leans a little more purple. And then last but not least is Rembrandt Viridian. And for better or for worse, I mentioned in a prior video that you may or may not have seen that I'm thinking of switching out phthalo green in my main watercolor palette for a Viridian. And this might actually be the Viridian that I would switch it out for. Viridian is very similar to phthalo green, but it is more granulating and kind of has a more, I don't know, gentle tone to it, almost pastel tone. And so if I ever do that, I might have to switch this one out yet again. All right, well, let me go ahead and zoom out there so you can see all of the samples with the pans here now that they're done. And I'm now going to go to this mixing palette here, or this little mixing triad, and I'm going to mix my colors here. Let me rinse or wipe this off here so that I have a clean surface for that mixing. I really only need a couple spaces there. Okay. So what I chose for this is Sodalite Genuine, Daniel Smith Sodalite Genuine, which is this one here. And then I chose Permanent Alizarin Crimson, which is this one. Oh, where's that one? It's this one here. And then I chose my Handmade Sienna. So I'll be really interested to see how these colors mix up, and I'll have to make sure that I am staying on track with the right colors here, because I'm trying to keep all this in the frame for you to see while I'm mixing that up. So let's, as usual, start with the red, which I chose as Daniel Smith Permanent Alizarin Crimson. Okay, so there's that. Okay, and I'm going to put that in this little mixing area here for when we get to the point of mixing. And then as my yellow, I chose this Handmade Sienna, which is this here. So I'm going to put that in the yellow box or yellow circle here. Okay, and now I'm trying to mix what is kind of an even amount of these two here. And that should make an orange, which it does. All right, and then in one half, I'm going to put a little bit more yellow, or sienna in this case. And you can use sienna as a yellow, which I don't know if a lot of people know that. In most cases, it will operate as a yellow. The only thing is when you get to the point of mixing with a blue, if you keep the mix mostly sienna, you'll keep it within the green realm. But once you tip a little bit too far into blue, you're going to get a gray. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. So now my Soda Light Genuine is what I used as my blue, which is this one here. And I'm being really messy with my swatches today. I apologize. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put some more of that there. I'm also going to wipe off this prior little mixing area so that we don't accidentally get any of those colors in there. Use a little water. That red is really staining. Okay, so here's our blue. I'm going to go with the sienna. So I'm going to mix that about equally with the sienna. And see, it's a little bit muddy, but it's still in the green family, I would say. It's sort of like an army green. Okay, and then I'm going to mix a little bit more sienna in half. We're getting a little brown there, I think. And then I'm going to mix a little bit more of the blue in the other half. And I think that's pretty much a gray that we're getting there. Okay, I'm going to wipe that out one more time. And let's do our last mix before we do the ones in the middle. So I'm going to put a little bit of red here. A little bit of blue. And we actually get a very nice purple there. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit more blue. Let me get a pretty bluish purple. And then I've kind of mixed my two halves together there. I might have to add a little bit more red. So then if I add a little bit more red here, actually I'm just going to go do the whole thing because I added a lot of red there. And there's it's pretty much in between this color and this color. Okay, I'll probably have to add some more color for each of the other colors here. I'm going to add some yellow. I'm going to add a little bit more red. A little bit more blue. So we're going a little purple, so I'll add a little bit more sienna. That is definitely a neutral. I'm going to add a little bit more red, and a little bit more blue. Just a little. Yeah, because then we're almost into black. Still leaning a little purple, I would say, but we're in neutral territory there. Okay, so that's it for this palette. And so this really shows you how you can mix primaries that are very neutral, and this is the sort of color mixing that you would get out of that. Okay, so that's it for today. Let's see what we have coming up next. We're getting towards the second half of the book here. So next, so I have a cloverleaf palette, which I don't think I've ever shown on the channel before. So that'll be interesting to go through that. And then I also have a tiny little wood palette that I have not shown on the channel either. So those should both be interesting for you all to see. All right, but for today, that's it. And feel free to like and or subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Have a great day. Thanks. Bye.